What's going on, AVS pros? Welcome to another Tech Talk. This is going to be a fun topic today. It's probably the most common topic that we discuss when we're going around prerequisites to standing up AVS. So, definitely something that's overdue. And we have a fantastic guest on the show today to walk us through some of the core concepts, Jason Medina. So, Jason, I'll have you introduce yourself, what team you're part of, and just kind of a high level of your role.
Yeah, Jason Medina. I'm senior customer engineer with the FastTrack team. Uh, been with Microsoft now going on about 2.5 years. My main focus is uh, Azure VMware Solution and Azure networking. With the FastTrack team is pretty much a service that includes any eligible Microsoft subscriptions that helps. We help customers deploy Microsoft Cloud solutions, end-to-end guidance. That you get from us. And we also assist with partners. And we pretty much assist with the deployment migration process at no additional cost. So that's essentially what we do at FastTrack.
Very cool, very cool. And you've been very active recently, especially around this topic. You've been, posting some blogs. I mean, maybe mention just a couple of them that you've done recently, because I know you've been hard at work on them.
Yeah, so I would say right now I'm working, well, the last three that I've worked on was a single region with vWAN, with global reach. That's a blog that was released. And the other was dual region with vWAN with global reach as well.
Yeah.
And the latest one that was released was single region vWAN without global reach. So these are all with AVS deployments. And the last one that I'm looking to release, hopefully sometime this week, is going to be the dual region without global reach.
Yeah.
So looking forward to getting that release. And eventually these are all going to get published to our Azure Docs as well.
Yeah, that's what I was going to mention next is like, I'm a huge fan of Microsoft Docs. I like the crowdsourcing aspect of it being on GitHub and you being able to suggest changes or corrections. I feel like it gets updated faster. So like, your content being added to it is just really powerful. And we'll note in the description below some of the specific design documents that we'll be covering in this tech talk. So that's pretty exciting. One thing. So like this is around connectivity. We actually did a connectivity video in the more training/learning format before of like the different connection types. And what we like to do is add tech talks to these to add context, because you and I work with customers all the time. That's what we do. That's what we do in our role, is help customers adopt AVS specifically. And like I said, a huge prerequisite and the most important part is getting the connectivity right. So this
Correct.
is more of like, what are the most common scenarios? And to kind of start us off, I think one of the most critical aspects that people that may know Azure a little bit need to know is like, AVS itself does not sit in a VNet. It's actually express route connected. And so like,
Correct.
starting there can really help people understand sort of like the components, the core components that make up how you adopt AVS, and what are the right networking layouts that you need. So we've got sort of these three main components that customers need to understand as they start building or modifying their existing Azure networking to use AVS. So let's kind of go through them one by one. Let's hit on global reach because it's a big component. How would you like simplify global reach for customers?
Yeah, so global reach, as you mentioned, ExpressRoute is normally the main connectivity for AVS, right? So the only way you can connect AVS back into Azure is via an ExpressRoute circuit. And what happens is also if you have ExpressRoute connectivity from on-premise going back to Azure, the only way to get connectivity between your on-premises and AVS is really through global reach. It's essentially tying these two circuits together logically to logical connection between the two that will pretty much announce routes between each other. So the way to think about it, there's a diagram out there that kind of explains the DMSCE and the MSCE from the on-premises perspective and a DMSCU from the AVS perspective. So essentially, when you create a global reach, what you're doing is you're creating an IBGP connection between the two, and this is how you would get connectivity between on-premises to AVS. So it's a logical connection.
It's a great, I mean, like, when you think of connecting other Azure components, even like, service endpoints for different services, you're always thinking of like VNet peering or somehow having a virtual network gateway. And like
Right.
we've been talking about, it doesn't sit in a VNet, it uses an express route. And that becomes really confusing for customers because they're like, wait, I already have express route. Am I paying
Yeah.
for another express route? No, it's part of the service. And that's how we logically connect AVS to on-prem, as well as, like you mentioned, your Azure component. So like, I think that's like, once people kind of get over that hump of like, oh, it's not a VNet that I just peer or somehow connect via gateway, it's
Right.
actually express route connected. So the connectivity from a networking perspective is so similar to how you set up express route for your own connectivity from on-prem into the cloud. It's just a Microsoft managed express route. So definitely a big point of clarity that helps customers kind of understand, okay, so a little bit different than some of the other Azure things I've been doing.
Yeah.
The next two get into kind of like specifically Azure networking and how you choose to do your Azure networking. So let's touch on sort of like a common one, which is a vWAN hub. What is a vWAN hub and why do customers choose it?
Yeah, so essentially breaking it down, a vWAN is kind of like a collection of services of networking, security, and routing functionalities. And inside of your vWAN, you actually have a hub. And inside of this hub is where all your connectivity comes in, whether you have VPN, Express Route, you can have a firewall inside of your vWAN. You can run third-party NVAs within this inside of your inside of the hub as well. So it allows for this any-to-any transitivity between branch sites to AVS. It allows this connectivity all under the hood. It's a managed VNet under the hood, but we're pretty much taking away the complexity of what you'd normally get from a traditional VNet in terms of having to worry about the routing. It's all done with the actual vWAN hub itself.
Yeah, so like, kind of going to most of the cloud services, it's more managed service and more managed
Correct.
routing than like the other more common one, which we'll move on to the next, which is, bringing your own networking. Like, so some customers want to use and define things more explicitly, whether that's, just total control and also how they, they want to mimic how they do things on-prem. That kind of goes into the other hub model. So maybe explain, you have a vWAN hub that can be some customer's hub and they choose it because of those reasons you mentioned, the simplicity, the managed service aspect of it,
Right.
the ease of use. But then other customers go for more of this build your own networking approach. What are the, what does that look like?
Yeah, so with an Azure Route Server, that's essentially it's a service that right now there is no way for you to inject routes from natively right into the Azure SDN. And the way to do that right now is with an NVA. So you can get an NVA, let's say you want to inject a route, say a default route, which is very common with our implementation with AVS. You can have any third-party appliance peer directly with Azure Route Server via eBGP, and you can go ahead and inject, for example, a default route directly into the ARS Azure Route Server, and Azure Route Server will go ahead and advertise that on out. So it is not in the data plane. It is only in the control plane. So you're only sending the routes that you would like to advertise. And also Azure Route Server will go ahead and advertise the VNets that may be peered to it, depending if it's using remote gateway peering or the VNet itself, it'll advertise that over to the NVA. So it's two-way, but it's also not in the data plane. It's all in the control plane.
And I think it's worth noting too, like, this approach was probably, I would almost say, the most common with AVS customers I've seen of build your own, hub essentially instead of choosing a vWAN hub. And I think a lot of it, and this is just my experience, maybe you have different experiences. They want to use their own networking components. A vWAN hub was exclusively just Azure Firewall for a long time, but now vWAN hub has like I believe Palo Alto as an
Yes.
option to use. Checkpoint is another one, right?
Checkpoint. You also have Fortinet
Yeah.
as well. Yep.
So definitely now, I think it is time. Customers can take it even more seriously since they, a lot of times cloud networking ends up being the same networking team, and they want to have commonality and central points of, a view of management, whether that be Palo Alto's tools or Fortinet. So like it wasn't really an option with the vWAN hub because you're with the Azure firewall, so you had to adopt Azure firewall. But now with the vWAN hub supporting these third parties, it does seem to be coming kind of like it's changing the, turning the tables, if you will, in the sense of more people are choosing vWAN hub because they do want that simplicity. Would you say that's relatively true?
Yeah,
What are your
I would
thoughts?
say overall, if you have Azure Firewall and you're looking to have Azure Firewall as your uh, primary firewall, and you would like to, for example, use um, AVS for internet connectivity, most of the customers are always going to use vWAN
Yeah.
because vWAN has that capability to go ahead and advertise the default route and still for example, and still route all that through the Azure firewall. Now, with your ARS, you would typically, now that there's a lot of vendors kind of supported with vWAN as well integrated, um, really depends if you have a specific vendor that that is not integrated or is not part of the life cycle for inside of the ecosystem for vWAN, right? If it's not, then you can use any third-party vendor you'd like as long as it supports BGP, and you can use that with Azure Route Server. Azure Route Server is completely separate from the vWAN. They're not. You would never deploy that inside of the vWAN.
Right.
These are two separate services that you would use.
Because to your point, ARS is really just to enable BGP connectivity that we really don't have unless we had a vWAN hub. So like ARS is more, synonymous or, with NVAs, third-party NVAs in VNet specifically.
Correct.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. I don't know. It's pretty exciting. I think, people are really leaning into the vWAN hub. I mean, we've seen more of the bring your own networking with, ARS within a VNet with an NVA, but I feel like that's changing because of the maturity of the vWAN hub. And I'd
Yes.
also say Microsoft, and VMware from a partnership perspective, I think VMware's obviously changed through the acquisition, but we were the 10th largest software manufacturer. Microsoft's obviously the first largest manufacturer. And one thing I like about our two companies and AVS together is we work with partners all the time. Like we have all these ecosystem partners, and networking's just a small example of it, especially with with Microsoft being able to work with Palo Alto and Checkpoint and Fortinet, FortiGate. Those are, I just think it's really a good partnership from that perspective. You have to work within a very complex ecosystem in IT, so pretty cool.
Yeah, I agree.
So, moving to the common scenario. So, what we wanted to touch on sort of in this latter half is the two most common scenarios that we see customers implement, Azure networking to adopt AVS, right? And so, that's mostly, there are like way more options online. We'll put the link in the description below so you can review all those. But I'd say that these are the most common. So maybe walk us through this scenario one, which looks like mostly the vWAN hub option.
Yeah, so with this vWAN hub option, this is essentially where most of our customers would want to use, for example, Azure Firewall, right? And with Azure Firewall, this goes back to you want to still inject a default route into AVS. So with this, you can go ahead and still advertise your default route into AVS and still have the capability to have internet connectivity via your secure vWAN hub, right? So if you notice, if you look at the traffic flow, all traffic internet outbound and inbound for L4, TCP, and UDP will transit your vWAN and go over via the express route and back down to AVS, right? So now when we look at it from well, how do you connect back to Azure, right? So you have an express route connection to your vWAN, but you also have another express route connection up over to your gateway, which is in the hub virtual network. And in this hub virtual network is essentially where you would be communicating with all your other services, IaaS services, whatever the case may be in this one. So here is an example where we have if you're looking to use a WAF solution with application gateway, you can still have your application gateway as seen here deployed in your hub. And you'd have your L7 HTTP inbound come through and will eventually go through the app gateway, and your backend servers can still live in AVS. So your real servers are still in AVS. So that's still a supported solution right there as well. Another thing to take under consideration here is, I don't know if you can see that clearly, but it says to use the quad 0 UDR to take precedence over the advertisement from the secure virtual WAN hub. And the reason for that is because since we're going to be advertising a route over to via vWAN to AVS, this route will also be linked into the hub virtual network. So it's very important that you're using UDRs inside of your VNets to just make sure that that's taking precedence as opposed to sending all your traffic over via the other route.
Gotcha. And so that one you're
vWAN.
calling out is specifically here, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, and then this notation here of making sure UDR, so the L7 traffic transverses, but all other traffic goes through the vWAN hub. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, we don't show it here, but a lot of times you can also have another firewall here. You may have another firewall. So it really depends on how the customer's laid out, but we've seen that some customers can also use another firewall in this hub VNet, and they may prefer that one to be the next hop, right? So that's when, in this case, they would use a UDR for that.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think the biggest one that I'll pose the question to you, because this is definitely something that customers missed on the first time around and slowly start to get on a couple times, is we notice this green line here. I'm showing it in red as I make the connection, is flowing directly, through sort of the underlay routers, the MSEE and the DMSEE. So it doesn't necessarily flow through the quote unquote hub network. And your recent blog posts show how you can make that happen. But I think that the general consensus is, we want to have global reach in place for mostly one reason, which is performance. Like, we're skipping additional hops to make sure that we go directly into AVS when we're doing these migrations, because they can be very bandwidth intensive, right? Like, we're talking about extending layer 2, potentially. Not every customer does that, but a lot of customers do. And we're looking at doing migrations of very large VMs, terabytes in size a lot of times. So, does that sound in line? I mean, would you?
Yeah, it kind of goes back to what we were just talking about in terms of the global reach. So what's happening now is, once you create global reach, there is like a logical BGP, IBGP peering, right, between your DMSEE to the MSEE. So now it builds this out, and now you can have communication directly to on-premise. But all traffic now, when you use global reach, as shown here, is going to eventually bypass any VNet or any vWAN. It's just going to go directly on out to AVS. So if you're looking at inspection, you may want to inspect either on premises or in AVS with NSXT. between the two, because if you're using a solution down at the Azure level, it's going to be completely bypassed. You will not see that traffic when you use Global Reach.
Yeah. And I think that catches some people off guard and they go, well, wait a second here. Like I expect to have kind of like a traffic cop on my edge and then within the hub that I'm creating. But the reality is Global Reach doesn't do that. You still have control at your router. If you absolutely must have some sort of control within AVS, you have NSXT, which you can use. We do have customers that implant their third-party firewall into NSXT. So if you want to keep consistency there, that is plausible. Adds a another layer of complexity, but is plausible, and we do have many customers that do it. But just to kind of reemphasize, the recommended solution that we usually go with is Global Reach for the performance. Because if you do go through the hub, you're adding additional hops, which may be fine in an end state. That's probably where you came with these blogs, right? Is they've already done the migration. Now they would like it to flow through a centralized point. Is that sort of what you see, or
Yeah, so normally what we see is when customers do not want to use Global Reach or can't, it's really falls under the three categories of from what I've experienced. And the first one can be that the region that they're located in doesn't support Global Reach. That's common. That's in the blog as well.
That's a great call.
Another one could be that that they just have a hard security requirement to inspect all that traffic between on-premise and AVS and vice versa via the Azure firewall, right? Or third-party firewall, that is. If they need to inspect that traffic at the Azure level, then Global Reach is not used in that case.
Yeah.
Right. And I would say the last one would be is if the customer is using a local SKU for express route. If you're using a local SKU for express route, it's not supported. Global Reach is not supported. You'd have to use the premium SKU for Global Reach support. So we have seen some customers that may be using the local SKU and they would have to opt out and not use using Global Reach.
It's a great insight. Yeah, I mean, there's many reasons, even outside of the just Global Reach as a performant, solution. I forget about our friends down in Latin America that,
Yeah,
that sometimes don't even have that option available.
Right, but overall, if Global Reach is not going to be used, we would prefer looking at the vWAN approach, which is going to be the blogs that I've been posting. It's a little less complex in terms of its deployment, and a lot easier in terms of understanding what's going on, especially with vWAN involved.
Yeah.
A lot more difficult to, not to say that it's not impossible, but it is possible to do it with traditional VNet approach. But the complexities of the management and the administrative overhead can be a little cumbersome for a lot of our customers, and which is why we looked at the vWAN approach, especially if you're not using Global Reach.
Very cool. Very cool. So let's hit scenario 2. So this gets into is a great segue of what you said previously of the VNet and NVA with route server. So why don't you walk us through sort of this diagram?
Yeah. So with this diagram, I guess we'll start, with the advertisement of the default route, right? So we have a third-party appliance here. We're not using Azure Firewall. So this is only if you have a third-party NVA, right? And now this is going to be peered via eBGP to the Azure route server. And now you can go ahead and inject the default route directly to your Azure route server. The Azure route server is going to go ahead and advertise this route because it has a platform managed BGP session that it creates, which is via iBGP to the gateway subnet, to the gateway. And now the default route is going to get advertised over the express route connection from the hub over into AVS. And that is how we essentially inject routes into AVS. And is another way to inject routes, because now that also impacts the spoke VNets that are directly peered to this VNet. So now you have spokes and you have AVS that are using the same firewall for internet outbound and internet outbound connectivity, right? Now, When we look at the inbound piece, same thing, L4, TCP, UDP inbound can still be used. You can still use it at the NVA level. As well, if you decide to use some sort of an application gateway, that can still be used as well. And all this can come through via the same hub virtual network. Now, if we look at the global reach piece again, same thing, right? So now any traffic that's between AVS and on premises, it's going to go right over the global reach connection, and it's going to completely bypass whatever third-party firewall vendor that you're using. So it goes back to what we were talking about before, that if you need to inspect that, that would either have to be done on premises or with an NSX firewall, or you can do a third-party appliance within NSX to inspect that traffic.
Very cool. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Did you have another thing to add there?
No, I think that pretty much covers this one right here. Again, the only time you'd really be looking at this is the majority of the times when we see this, the main key focus here is how do we inject the default route, right? And that's why we need Azure Route Server.
Yeah,
right?
which is the primary reason why we have this component that not a lot of people have heard of unless they have AVS. I know it applies into some other scenarios as well, but usually this is one of the components when we have a customer that would say is already somewhat mature in their Azure networking journey. They usually need to add this component to make sure that they can inject the zero route into their NVA so that AVS can flow this way, for the internet and outbound and inbound connectivity.
Correct. And for those that are watching that may be wondering how come we can't use Azure Firewall, it's simply because Azure Firewall does not support BGP. So Azure Firewall natively does not support BGP, which is why we recommend using the previous scenario 1, if you're looking to use Azure Firewall, to just integrate it with vWAN, because then it'll work. Because with vWAN and the vHub, it'll go ahead and advertise, the hub will go ahead and advertise that and inject the default route for you. But if Azure Firewall is solely deployed on its own, there is no way to do that now.
And it's worth mentioning because, this is a common question comes up with customers too, is, this is all because AVS exclusively uses BGP for that communication outbound. Like, it's really set up in a very simple format of the tier 0 is, BGP paired with the express route connection. And so we have to be able to allow those routes be, propagated through via BGP, which is why BGP is so commonly, discussed here.
Yes.
And today, as it stands, and this is easily to change in the future based on some of the things I've seen in the roadmap. Today, there is no policy routes at the tier 0, right? So it's all about, connectivity to, what this infrastructure looks like and what, if you're using global reach, what those routes are. So, common thing for customers to kind of slowly start picking up on how we do routing within AVS. So
correct. Yeah, I would say the other major component here, and this is going to be for both scenarios, is up there at the top. You'll notice that we have route filter blocking quad 0 from Azure. Customers just want to make sure that they're using a BGP filter on their express route connection. You don't want to inadvertently learn the default route because it will be advertised over to on premises, and this is for both scenarios. So you just want to make sure that you have a filter in place, especially you want to filter out that quad 0. If you inadvertently learn that, you may impact your own internet connectivity on premises.
Yeah, most definitely. Well, definitely one of our longer conversations on Tech Talks, but I knew we were in for it because it's networking. It's always like this. And it's such an important topic because, like I said, every time we hit these prerequisite pilot stages, if this isn't figured out, if none of this is figured out, AVS isn't going to work. Like, we have to have the proper networking, plumbing to be able to get into the SDDC, to get into HCX and download the appliances, to do any of the other, all that is at a stop until you configure, out the networking components. And I've seen some customers like maybe their success criteria isn't really Azure services connectivity. It's just on-prem into AVS, and they just do global reach and do the quad zero back. I've seen some unique scenarios, but at
Correct.
the end of the day, if you're going to adopt this solution, you're going to adopt a different use cases that are inevitably going to come with communicating between AVS and Azure services. So again, the whole gamut needs to be taken care of at some point in time, and usually it's best to start the foundation soon. So
Yep.
yeah.
I think what it really falls down to is also when you're looking at these solutions, a lot of times we also notice customers get a little lost. And it's really what you really want to look at is what traffic flows are important to you, what do you want to inspect. And once you have that idea, especially here, if you use these legends here and you look at what exactly you're inspecting, that's going to give you a better idea as to what solution is best for you.
Yeah. Yep. And that's every time in a pilot, getting that kind of down on paper of like, okay, these are the most important aspects that I want to see happen, for this conversation, for networking, for a flow perspective, but also in AVS, like what do I want to see succeed in this
Right.
pilot stage? What makes the biggest difference to me as a customer? So this has been excellent, great conversation. I really appreciate you hopping on, and I appreciate everyone checking out this video if you made it this far. If you got some ideas around additional tech talks, maybe around networking, maybe around migrations and other components, drop a comment below. And we're always taking suggestions for new content. So again, Jason, thanks for the time. Appreciate you hopping on.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you everyone else. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.